Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Hi, I'm Roxanne Meshar. Welcome to Access to Democracy. And my guest today, who has been on Access to Democracy before, is Mike McIntee of the UpTake.org, which is one of the independent local media that we have in this Twin Cities area and provides a real service. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and why it's so important. But first I'd like to introduce Mike. Mike, welcome back to Access to Democracy. Good to have you
Roxanne,
with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Always glad to be here.
Nice to have you, yes. So the topic today, importance of independent local public media and why it's important and why viewers would want to know about the work you do and what it means for them. So we're just going to start out talking a little bit about your background. You're a journalist. You're also a filmmaker.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and you have a film that came out this year. Maybe we'll just start with that.
Well, I'm a first-time filmmaker, and
Okay.
it's kind of a strange thing to get into when you're this late in your career. But we did a documentary about the battle that happened in Minnesota over the whole marriage equality issue, and it turned into a real personal story because we had a lot of the people who were involved, the volunteers, and we kind of saw it through their eyes. I mean, it was a great story by itself in the sense that the worst thing was possible that could happen to the LGBT community was going to possibly happen, and they fought back, and then they got more than they ever hoped that they would. I mean, we kind of all know that storyline, but it's all the things that happened along the way and how it changed them and the people involved that really make it an interesting story.
The process of how it got there. So the movie is about that process, and it's called How Love Won.
It's called How Love Won, and we showed it at the Twin Cities, Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival, and it won the Audience Choice Award.
Congratulations, really wonderful.
I was blown away because there's literally, I think, like 50 or 60 other documentaries it was up against, and it finished the highest of all of those.
Which says something, and how the quality of it and how well it was done. We were able to get our own copy, but is there a way viewers today can get a copy? Is that out yet?
Well, it's not out yet, but
Okay.
because we're still showing it in film festivals across the country, and we're trying to get it to some other film festivals
Nice.
and show it there. So eventually it's going to be available by DVD, and we may show again here in the Twin Cities. So if people are really interested in that, they can go to the website for the film called It's howloveone.com, coincidentally.
Howloveone.com, okay.
And you go there, howloveone.com/sign up, and you can sign up and get on our email list, and we'll notify you when it's going to be coming out and when you might be able to see it or where you might be able to see it.
Perfect. So perfect. That's a good. So go to HowLoveOne and check and get yourself on the list, and they'll notify you, and you might be able to see it beforehand in the theater, which would be wonderful.
That's what we're hoping. Yes.
Excellent. Also, before we continue on with independent local media, I just want to ask you about another kind of work that you do. You are somewhat of a local radio personality. You do Radio 950 talk shows from time to time, almost on a regular basis now. So maybe tell us a little bit more about that work that you're doing.
I've been doing on and off work over at AM 950 probably for the last 10 years, I think. Even predates the UpTake, but it started out as kind of a lark, a fill-in thing, and then just kind of grew. I'm kind of regularly doing the 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock hour, and it's political talk, but it's also news-based. It's those strange things that we introduce on the progressive side called facts, talking about the facts about what is going on, and we use a lot of actualities and sound. What makes us different than probably the regular newscast that you might listen to is there you'll hear 20 or 30 seconds, if that, of something. We'll play a 2 or 3 minute clip so you get the whole context and everything.
That would be different.
And then we obviously take call-ins and what people think about it as well.
So you do have call-ins. So we could come back to this, but off the top of your head, what's the most interesting call-in that you remember getting?
Oh, I mean, there's been so many. Unfortunately, some things turn into arguments. And what's interesting is having a conversation and trying to take somebody who's called in obviously with a political agenda and they want to be snide and make something, but taking that and turning it around and saying, okay, you've got a point there. Let's talk about that. And I'll liken this back to the film that we were just talking about, because in How Love Won, the way that the activists won was to actually get within people's values and talk to them and kind of work within them to discuss the issue. And that's what I try to do when people call in, and if their values are kind of way off from maybe what my audience is used to talking to, I'm going to grab that as an opportunity to kind of go into that and talk about it and work within them to kind of say, okay, maybe there's a common ground we can agree on, or there's a point that can be made here.
Because it's interesting you say that, because the reality is, regardless of the political party or affiliation, in general, most people have very much the same values. They want safe neighborhoods for their kids. They want to be able to have a home that's safe. They want to be able to do work that contributes to the community. They want a good education for their children. They want clean water. They want clean air. They want access to healthy food. These are pretty commonly found values, and even though the way of achieving those might vary, in general, when you ask people, regardless of where they land on the political spectrum, they're likely to say, yes, that's what I want.
It is, but what's interesting is they'll go outside of those values when they're driven by fear. And unfortunately, that is what drives a lot of our politics these days. It's not about I'm for something, I'm against something. In fact, that's what you're seeing in the current presidential race.
Is fearful of something.
Most people are not voting for a particular candidate on one side or the other. They're voting against the other candidate because they fear, rightly or wrongly, what that candidate might bring to the office.
So true. Yeah, it's so true. So that's a nice segue as we move into this election season that is now running at full tilt since Labor Day.
Somebody would argue it's been running full tilt for the last year,
yes,
but
good
yes,
point,
but it's now moved up a notch.
So the UpTake, however, is contributing in a unique way to Minnesota local races, and maybe you want to share a little bit about that for viewers who will be interested.
Sure. I mean, in Minnesota, we have 3 congressional races that are very much at the on the hot list, as you would call it nationally, because there's concerns by both parties that the House might flip. And that happens when, there's a contentious race. In Minnesota's 8th Congressional District, which is represented by Rick Nolan, and Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District, which is an open seat, used to be occupied, or currently is occupied by John Klein, and then Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District, which is occupied by Eric Paulson, all the polls are very close, and the Trump factor might make any one of these races go one way or the other. So we are going to be live streaming the debates that happen in each one of those congressional districts, along with some other legislative debates that are going on, because the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate are all up for election, and there's some key races there that could determine one way or the other. So we're trying to provide voters an opportunity to see firsthand what is being said, and not just live, but also a record afterwards, so they can go back and say, did he really say that? You know, because so often you see in commercials, you know, they'll say, so-and-so is against blah, 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 because they said 2-second snippet. Well, you can go back on our video and see the entire 2 minutes that surrounded that 2-second snippet to make sure that it wasn't taken out of context.
Very nice. So they'll be able also to go in at their convenience, viewers will, and read about and actually listen to the debates and hear what happened and inform themselves at their convenience, even if they may not be able to watch the debates live, which is really terrific.
Yeah, although if you get to watch the debates live, one of the ways you get to kind of participate, in the sense we run a live blog, and so you can make comments as things are happening, and we moderate them so the wacky stuff doesn't get in there. But if you've got a particular point you want to make about what somebody said, not that the candidates are going to be watching that while it's happening, but the audience is, it's a great opportunity to be involved.
That is an opportunity, so they can participate as well as listen. Really wonderful. So you're, I know, raising funds and hoping to have the personnel and everything set up for that, so that will be all taken care of. But people should know that you are supported by citizens, so it's important for people, if they like independent public media, like the UpTake, which does these kinds of things, which serve a real public service. That takes money.
Oh, it does. In fact, we're fundraising for 3 very specific things right now. The debates that you just mentioned, because that takes money to do that. We have to replace our equipment at the Capitol. Most people don't realize, but we do more live streaming of the legislature than any other media in the entire state. But because of all the construction that's been going on at the Capitol, they're moving us into a new office, and which is really cool, but it requires that we change all of our equipment because it's now digital. So we're having to replace a good portion of our equipment, so we're going to have to fundraise for that. And then we have the legislature coming up, of course, in January, and that's going to be very interesting because it will be Governor Dayton's final 2 years, and he'll have maybe a very different legislature to work with, and so there could be some big changes on issues, and we want to live stream all that.
Yes, and we'll want to hear it and want to see it, so yes, that will be excellent. So yes, that all of this takes money, takes resources, and it isn't free, so it's good for people to remember that. So thinking about mainstream media for a minute, which is very different from the kind of independent media that you're doing, or legacy media, I think, as you like to.
Legacy media it's a term I use because, it's been around for a long time. It's not mainstream sometimes. It's just been there.
So, just been there. So we've always done it that way, even though it isn't really mainstream. So let's talk a little bit about coverage and how they're covering national elections, even other elections too, and what they're doing, not doing, what's going on there.
Well, just what I mentioned a little while ago, fear. Fear is, I'm a former television producer, and I know that one of the ways I can get people to watch what I'm doing is to scare them. I mean, this is, a well-known fact. Your life could be ending because of what's in the refrigerator. News tonight at 10. Okay. Unfortunately, campaign coverage kind of comes down to that same way.
We've certainly seen that in spades.
Your candidate is scary because she uses emails this way. Your candidate is scary because he said something really crazy. Okay, that's where the focus has been on Hillary Clinton's emails, on certain things that Donald Trump has said, and it has not allowed the media, or the media has not taken the initiative to get down and talk about a lot of the real issues. And dig into things and tell you where do they really stand on these things, and ask those tough questions and get some answers. And that's, I'm not saying that they don't want to do that. It's just that what drives people to watch is not that. And so you have to rely on independent media, like us or Mother Jones or a lot of other folks that are out there who dig into things and find out that information that just the other folks it's not that they don't want to tell the story, it's just that it's not the sexiest thing they can do right now.
It's too easy to get sidetracked, which is what's quick and easy with fear-based journalism or the things that will grab the most eyeballs or best clickbait.
See, it's that last part, grab the most eyeballs, because it's commercial journalism, and if you don't have people watching, then you're not making money for the people who own you.
Yes, exactly. And as we are talking about this, I want to mention too, especially for our viewers, when you go to websites for candidates and you're looking at policies and issues and what they support, it's important to remember that you use a critical eye. So often you go to a website and you might say, the candidate says, I support improving education. But then you have no idea what that really means. Does that mean they support private charter schools and that's their idea of improving education and maybe the predatory student loan lending that goes with that, or do they support actually improving local public schools and contracts for teachers and so forth? So that's one area. Another area, the candidate might say they're pro-environment, but you don't know, does that mean I still support fracking and I'm going to throw a few trees out there, and it really has nothing to do with protecting water supply and long-term. And we might find it also in the area of Social Security, and what does protecting Social Security mean? Because for some people, it might mean raising the age limit, but that's really privatizing it, because then as a private citizen, I'm relying on my own funds for those years that are lost because the age limit goes up. And of course, Wall Street is salivating for that higher age limit because it's privatizing it in a different way. So when people do go to the website, they need to look at candidates and see what they're really saying and ask those questions, because candidates will be out, people will be knocking on doors, people will be having meetings with citizens, coffee shops and so forth, and it's good to ask them, where do you really stand on education? What does expanding or supporting improving education, what does that really mean? Any thoughts about that?
Well, a couple things. Number one, don't rely on the opposition to tell you what the candidate says, because they're very much going to. There's a thing with voting records that say so-and-so voted against education and therefore, voted to do X. The thing is, so many bills these days are wrapped up into what they call omnibus bills, and that's a big word that means we've thrown a lot of issues into one bill. And it may be that the politician liked 6 of the things in there and 2 of them they didn't, but they voted for it anyhow because they wanted those other 6 things to pass. But they voted still for those other 2 things. And those get used on mailers and all sorts of stuff to say all sorts of stuff. So disregard most of that junk that's thrown out there by the opposition.
Good advice.
But go to the candidate. In fact, call, especially when you're dealing with legislative candidates. You'd be surprised how easy it is to reach them. You don't have to go through a lot of doors, and you can ask, and you can probably meet them and ask about certain things. I'm all for people being citizen lobbyists, because the best time to lobby somebody is when they're running for election or re-election. And you can say, what about that? And I really would like you to do it this way, and see if you can sway them.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think they are much more accessible than people might think. You really can go and stop and chat with them and talk with them. And I found almost all of them very receptive and good listeners, and they want to know what we're thinking, and they do remember. And as long as you're clear about what it is you expect and what your values are and what you're trying to have promoted or accomplished, legislators will work towards those values, towards those goals, if we can make that clear, which is their job. And they're happy to listen, and they remember, and they do take notes. So I've had good experience, both parties, actually.
Yeah, and then there are certain things that, because the leadership tells them, or because the party is that way, they are not going to move on.
Yes.
And you just have to realize that.
True.
And because it's a great talking point for the next election, like we just went through this whole thing with the Southwest Light Rail, with the Republicans being very much against it, because it's a great talking point to outstate Minnesota, because outstate Minnesota, or at least they can make it appear that well, if we vote for trains for the metro, that's going to mean less roads for the outstate, which is not true.
Right.
But that's how it's presented, and it's a great sales job you can do.
True. Talking about, too, getting re-elected and local elections coming up, we've had a couple of things come up with, for sure, candidate coming off the ballot or maybe being challenged for the ballot. Any thoughts about that?
You're talking about the Bob Barrett
Yes,
case, Representative
exactly.
Bob Barrett, and did he live in that house that in Taylor's Falls that had very little furniture? He rented for $300 from a contributor, and the trash wasn't ever picked up because he didn't like having trash picked up on
Yes.
Friday, so he'd drive 6 miles to town. Supreme Court did not buy his story on that. And this was the second cycle in a row he'd been challenged on this by some DFL activists, and it went to the Supreme Court. Court listened to the arguments. Barrett said, "You brought this up too late. I can't be. Nobody can be on the ballot for November because of this."
Yes.
And the court said, "Well, too bad. We just really don't believe your story." And neither did the person we sent out, the lower judge, to listen to all this. So they said, "I'm sorry, you're ineligible," and so he's off the. He's not off the ballot.
Right.
The ballot's still going to be there for November, but it's not going to count. When they count the votes, they're just not going to count them. Instead, there's going to be a special election in February on Valentine's Day, and the people of 32B will not be represented during the first 6 weeks of the legislature.
And the other thing will happen, what do you think in terms of turnout on Valentine's Day? How will that work?
Obviously, people will be going out for romantic dinners as opposed to going out to vote. Of course, that's in the evening, voting is during the day, but people just don't go vote in special elections because it's not top of mind. It's not being pounded into you for the year ahead of time that Election Day is November 8th. Election Day being February 14th on a race maybe I don't care about because I really wanted to vote for president. I don't really care about the legislative race. It's going to have a very low turnout. And this is a district that indexes Republican. It is likely that whoever the Republican Party puts on the ballot for that special election is probably going to win.
Yes. The other thing that could happen, too, this is Minnesota, February 14th, could be a huge snowstorm. I mean,
It could be. It
turnout could be even lower
However,
than you might
though,
think.
even with a special election and our general elections, people can now, under the new voting rules in Minnesota, do no excuse absentee balloting. So essentially, you can go down to the polling place a couple weeks in advance and vote just like you normally would in a
True.
regular election. So you don't have to wait till Election Day.
Which is a good thing to remind viewers that this is absolutely true.
And that starts here in Minnesota in just a few weeks.
Yes, it does. So, and actually, for the primary, it was possible for people to do it as well. So,
Yes, it
and
was.
and it worked pretty well. We did it, and it was an interesting experience, but was fine.
I went down to Eagan City Hall, filled out my ballot, put it in the machine, and it was just like regular Election Day.
So that's something that we want viewers to remember. So you can always vote in advance if you can't get to the polls on the actual day. Let's talk a little bit about the upcoming legislative session. Any thoughts there of the key issues that you think might arise?
Well, just the thing we just mentioned with there's going to be one person, they're going to be down one when they start the legislative session. And that means that there's going to be an odd number of legislators. And so if it's close, this and it's going to then change when they come back, that could be an interesting story. That's if it's that close. I don't
Yes.
think that's going to be the case. Republicans are trying to defend a lot of seats that they won in the last election cycle, which was a non-presidential year, low voter turnout. They're probably not going to hang on to all of those seats, and it could actually flip. You could actually end up with the Democrats in charge of all three, the House, the Senate, and the governorship, which you would probably then see a lot of things get passed. Although we've seen that in the past before, where they've had control of all three, and they've argued because there are Democrats don't always agree on everything, surprisingly. So a lot of things that Governor Dayton wants to have done in his last couple of years, some education things, some clean water things, those might get through very easily.
Yes.
Transportation, if that happens. If not, it could be another 2 years of gridlock, and who knows what gets through.
How do you think national elections might affect this local elections for our legislature?
Oh, it has a huge impact, because that's, as I mentioned, Trump, and it's a real question of whether Republicans feel that there's a lot of Republicans who don't like Donald Trump because in Minnesota, most Republicans actually voted for a different candidate.
Yes.
And there's been some hesitancy by a lot of Republicans to get behind Donald Trump for a lot of various reasons. The enthusiasm factor isn't there, and so there's a fear that the Republicans who normally you can count on to turn out every election are not going to do that. The other thing is, that's kind of happening on the Democratic side as well, because a lot of people aren't enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
There's been so much negative stuff said about her for decades that Minnesotans wanted Bernie Sanders, you know. So we have neither candidate that Minnesotans wanted on the ballot. And so that may just drive down the turnout in a state that's traditionally one of the highest turnout states in the entire United States.
Wow. So we could really see some shifts happen just because of the lower voter turnout.
And the other thing,
which means your vote really counts for sure.
It does. Your vote's worth a little bit more. I think the more interesting thing about the enthusiasm factor is the volunteer factor on both parties, because from what I've been hearing, it's a little bit harder for each party to be getting volunteers right now because not everybody, I mean, in 2008, people were, I want Obama, I'm going to get out there and work like crazy.
There's not that energy and enthusiasm.
And so it's harder to get people to go do the drudge work of putting up lawn signs, knocking on doors, all those things, the groundwork that makes a big difference in elections.
True, and when the vote is always instead against something else rather than for something, it is going to often lack that energy and lack that motivation. Just what you're describing makes it harder. We just have a couple minutes left, but I do want to take time so we don't lose this, since our topic is the importance of independent local media, and you're so critical to that here in the Twin Cities. Share a little bit about your thoughts and why it's so important that we have this other voice.
Well, I mean, just for the couple of reasons I've talked about, but let's summarize them. Number one is your commercial media, is focused on how can I get the most eyeballs on something, and not what is the most important story that we should be telling or what's the need that we should be filling. Now, I'm not saying that journalists in general aren't thinking about that, but that is what the companies that own them are driving towards. And independent media is going to be a little bit more thoughtful, is going to cover the things that maybe get ignored because, well, there's just not enough people interested in that. I think that's probably the biggest reason why you should support independent media, is that it does do that. I mean, for example, nobody shows entire committee meetings that happen at the legislature except us.
Yes.
You know, the TPT does, but they don't even show them all live. We show them all live. And
you tend to cover things in more depth. So if people want to learn a little more and not just the 3-minute or 30-second spot, UpTake will often take you there. So
and we invite people to get involved as well and volunteer and help us out, either to figure out what we want to cover or help with the coverage itself.
So excellent. We're just about ready to close here, but I want to thank you so much for joining us and coming on the show, and remind viewers to go to the uptake.org and like them on Facebook and social media, and watch the debates, and use the UpTake as a good place to get the schedules and know what's coming up, especially in their own district, and to learn more and become educated and know how much your vote is going to count in the fall. So Mike, thank you for joining us. Good to have you on the show. And thank you for joining us. Until next time, bye now.